Before we start the video, I want you to imagine this for me. You get home from school, do your chores, eat dinner with the family, and then finally, it's time to watch some TV. So you flip on some Cartoon Network, and wouldn't you know it, a marathon of your favorite show is on. A few episodes in, and you start to feel a little sleepy. You fall back onto your pillow, just to rest your eyes for a moment. When suddenly, in the dead of night, you wake up in a cold sweat, greeted by this. Frozen in fear, your eyes stay glued to the screen. What am I looking at? Am I having sleep paralysis? In a panic, you shut the TV off. But before you drift back into sleep, you have one final thought. What was that? That, my friends, was a bump. Okay, fine, but what is a bump? A bump, or bumper, refers to a break in the programming shown between commercials in the show itself. You've probably seen these on things like the Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, or MTV, usually advertising what was coming up next or to promote a new show or movie. They were often pretty forgettable, opting for bright and flashy promos to grab your attention in hopes that you'd stay seated for whatever was coming next. Things like "Stay tuned" and "Coming up next" generally come to mind. In the early days of television, bumps had a more technical role. You see, tape machines of that time took a few seconds to fire up, so board operators would run a few seconds of pre-recorded tape before the actual show started. This way, there wasn't just a blank screen between broadcasts. Once the 1970s rolled around, the FCC required most Saturday morning cartoons to have bumpers. This way, audiences could distinguish between the show and the advertisements that followed. I'm guessing this was to establish that there was no relation between the products advertised and whatever episode of Scooby-Doo was on. Japan had something similar that they called an eye catcher. These would vary in execution, but most of them appeared midway through the show as a still or a quick animation. One of the most popular examples being Cowboy Bebop's jazzy intermissions. Later on, as technology advanced, bumps became sort of antiquated and gone by the wayside. This wasn't until decades later when networks started using them again in a more artistic light. Some of my favorite bumps to date were the ones that aired on Cartoon Network in the mid-2000s. There was just something so cool about seeing all these different characters interacting with each other. You just know that the creators had to have some fun with this one in the studio. Now, it's worth mentioning around this time that we had also been gifted Toonami, airing earlier in the day and aiming to provide a more action-centered experience. Hosted by robotic and overall cool guy, Tom, this block would feature acclaimed classics like Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon, even going as far to air music videos by bands like Daft Punk and Gorillaz. Suffice to say, Toonami held its own in the annals of bump history. But that is a different video for a different time.
Activate disintegrators.
Though many channels worked in this arena, there is one that stands out above the rest. One network that took the simple task of informing the viewer and turned it into an art form unto itself. Yes, I'm of course referring to the Adult Swim bumps. I mean, I was probably going to mention it. It's in the title. Anyway, even early on in their existence, Adult Swim understood that not only should the content be fun, but you could also have fun with the non-content, deciding to make the in-between just as compelling as the shows they offered. Take, for example, their first and probably most iconic bump ever.
All kids out of the pool for Adult Swim. All kids out!
I remember seeing this for the first time when I was 9 years old, and my head almost exploded. What is this? Did Cartoon Network change overnight? Are my parents gonna bust in and yell, "Hey, You can't watch this. You're not old enough. But as I continued watching, I was mesmerized. Not just by the adult animation that would rot my promising brain, but rather the comforting feeling I would get whenever that music would kick in. As if the TV was saying, "Hey man, forget about your troubles. Watch this meatball instead." Fast forward to the mid-2000s, and the Adult Swim bumps had evolved significantly. By this time, viewership had almost doubled since the block got its start earlier in the decade, establishing a rabid fan base that fell in love with the absurdist humor that was pouring out of the studios at this time. Shows like Tom Goes to the Mayor, Moral Oral, and Aqua Teen Hunger Force. As growth continued, the Atlanta-based company decided to make a few changes in the format, most notably ditching the old people and the mambo music. This would be one of the biggest shifts in the Adult Swim saga, switching things up with a plain black background and simple white text overlay, taking on a role as a sort of sarcastic, faceless entity that spoke to you directly. It was also during this period that they expanded their runtime and started airing 6 nights a week. With this direction, they could now inform viewers of nightly lineups, new shows, and even answer a few emails on air. This snarky attitude would become a signature trademark of the Adult Swim identity forever. No longer just a flash in the pan on weekends, Adult Swim was now a household name. Alright, so we got all that out of the way. We talked about the history and the evolution of the bumps. Now we can talk about my favorite part. That's right, I'm talking about the visual bumps, comprised of a picture or, in rare cases, an animation thrown together with a piece of music. Simple, but effective. No one really knows the true intention behind these. They're just cool to look at, cool to listen to. They're just, I don't know, cool. Anyway, these two became a gold standard in putting the late night production on the map. Not only did you get these neat interstitials, but you also had some killer tracks to go with it. I mean, holy crap, there was a lot of amazing music that got thrown into this. Curating from independent record labels, the folks at Williams Street hand-picked artists that are now considered legends in the biz. Artists like MF Doom, Aesop Rock, Flying Lotus, Jay Dilla, and more. The list is endless, quickly transforming into a hotbed where underground artists could be heard on a massive scale. It was these instrumentals that played such an integral part to pushing the brand forward. These were my personal favorites. I mean, there's just something about this medium that just, I don't know, it grabs me. It was cool, it was new, it was something different. This would go on to inspire a whole flock of YouTubers to make their own fan-made bumps and put them up for others to view. A true testament in the lasting impression that the craft has had on a generation. But why is it that there's such a large percentage of people that are drawn to this genre? I think what it boils down to is this. The Zoomer millennial generation have hard roots in nostalgia, aeons of people raised on the basic cable of the 2000s. A whole generation of people that stayed up late and marveled at these seemingly insignificant segments. This was a time in television where we didn't really have a choice in what we watched, and we couldn't skip the ads after 5 seconds, so naturally, you just took it all in. People will often herald this as times of simplicity, when things like TV were one of your top priorities. You didn't watch it just to unwind, you watched it because you loved it, because you wanted to be entertained. As I wrote this video, it started as a basic concept about Adult Swim bumps. Somewhere down the line, it sort of changed for me. I started to think about how nostalgia affected myself and others, particularly the bond we share with certain forms of expression. Through imagination alone, we can conjure up places we haven't been or people we haven't met. And yet, even in those made-up scenarios, we can find ourselves bewildered. There's a strange connection that people feel whenever you combine certain music with certain visuals. We are a deep, feeling species, and it doesn't take much to invoke some sort of sentimentality in us. Before I wrap this up, I just want to say we truly live in a beautiful time. The internet has become a living, breathing time capsule for us. If there was a weird thing you remember seeing on TV growing up, chances are you'll find it and go, "Oh man, I remember this." I hope you enjoyed this video and it inspires you to take a deep dive on some of your old interests. Thanks for watching.